This episode of Bright Hearth is brought to you by KeepWise Partners, Indigo Sundry Soap Company, Backwards Planning Financial, Gray Toad Tallow, Live Oak Integrative Health, Farmer Bill's Provisions, Founders Ministries, and by our supporters at patreon.com. Egalitarianism is not the belief in equality before God or before the law. It is the hatred of all distinction, all excellence, all God-ordained hierarchy. It does not seek to elevate the lowly, but to tear down the noble, the righteous, and the gifted. It does not love justice, for justice requires judgment. Rather, it exalts envy as a virtue and calls it fairness. In the name of equality, it would make all men slaves to the deified state, for only in bondage can men be truly alike. Join us in this episode of Bright Hearth as we take up listener questions on subjects ranging from egalitarianism in classical Christian education and training of children, to discipline, to the marriage bed, and more.
Welcome back to Bright Hearth, everybody. We are here for another Q&A episode.
And man, we've got some good ones. We were going to wait longer for a Q&A episode, but you guys just have some good questions. I got to say, you're sending them in like 30 a week. So I'm not saying slow down. I'm saying good job. Good job.
Helping us get ahead. So you guys actually have stuff to listen to.
Yeah, we're in the past
when
right
we're
now.
Holding a newborn.
Lexi is currently pregnant, and this episode, I believe, is going to come out on March 31st that we're recording, but it's not even March right now. We're in February. In fact, isn't March 31st our due date?
March 30th.
Oh, March 30th. Okay. So this episode, Lord willing, will come out the day after our due date. So we may have a baby. You may know this already. In fact, let us know, guys. Send us in a text. Do we have a baby when we record this episode?
What's your guess?
I think we will. I think this one's going to stick the landing like some of the other ones we had.
I have a feeling we will too.
There's been movement.
We've been having stuff.
Early.
Anyways.
Also here, I want to know from you guys, do you think that our baby's going to be a boy or a girl? Because this is the first one we're not finding out.
This last time?
Probably. I don't remember. I have 6 kids. I hardly remember what I ate for lunch today. We are glad to be back here. Lexi, how are you doing? What is it like being a pregnant American? What are we, 35 weeks in? Is that what that is?
Yes.
35-week pregnant American. What's it like?
Well, this old pregnant American feels old this end of the pregnancy. I feel old. Relaxing makes one feel not good.
Oh,
not good at all.
That's the thing that makes all your joints stretch out. Huh?
Oh, yeah. And it feels way worse this time for some reason.
I feel like every time I look at you, you are sitting in a weird place.
Yeah. It's just
like
been the last week that suddenly I'm like, what's happening? Anyways, but we're good. No. All things considered, we are doing the right things that we should be doing.
Yes.
So,
excellent.
Here we are.
Excellent. Well, I am glad to be here with you and glad to be taking up some listener questions. We've got a bunch of them. I wanted to start with one that almost became a whole episode, but I think it's worth some conversation from us. I will say, I don't know exactly the date that this is coming out, but I did record a whole King's Hall episode actually on this subject of this question with Eric and Dan. And in that episode, I wrote a 4,000 word cold open that goes through a lot of historical background on this question. And then we had like over an hour of discussion on it. But that was from a perspective of a couple of men and pastors and things like that. I think we can answer it from a completely different perspective, focusing a little bit more on the home. But the question is, it goes like this. There's been a lot of conversation on Twitter lately about classical Christian education and homeschooling education, especially some of the challenges of educating boys and girls to become men and women rather than just treating them as if they are the same. Any thoughts on this subject? I know our friend John Moody's tweeted a lot about this recently.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he has. He's familiar with the subject, especially some of the challenges of classical Christian education with basically setting it up to be anti-boy, to not adequately take into account maleness.
In classical Christian education?
Yeah, and in school environments and things like that. So he's written a lot about that. I know also And I mentioned this in the King's Hall episode Cold Open that Stephen Wolfe had been talking about it lately.
Oh, okay.
Some of the challenges specifically on that front about universal education.
Yeah.
And my answer is that there are huge challenges to this, and we have probably not adequately thought through some of the ways that we've moved ancient landmarks in not just like homeschool or classical education, but just in education generally in the last 3 centuries. And so I have some thoughts, but I'm wondering if you have any here. Like, we're thinking about how to raise boys and girls to be men and women, to have distinctness, and not embracing the Cold Open. I use that introduction because this was going to be our first question about egalitarianism. I do think we can have an egalitarianism problem in education, but before I rant, maybe do you have any thoughts or kind of further questions or clarifications or that kind of thing?
Well, when we were first learning, not about homeschooling or like Christian education, but when we were first learning about classical education specifically, I don't actually remember what book it was. And I don't even know if Daphne was born yet, so it was a long time ago. But I do remember a Christian making the argument about like, well, we don't owe every child. Like, okay, so there's a Christian teacher in the public school education system saying, but if we do away with the public school education, so many children will be without education. We're going to like fail them basically. And the Christian was basically saying, it's not a right to be educated. Like, it's not universal education is not something that we should come to expect of culture in general. But in the very same breath, they were wanting to do the same thing with classical education. And it has for years and years and years, that has always stuck out to me. And it's part of why, like, it makes sense to me that there would be some homeschoolers for different reasons,
Yeah.
But it kind of always in the back of my maybe it was the like snarky Lexi coming out, but you're trying to do the same exact thing with classical education in a school setting. But you can't say like, and I understand it's a pagan school system. It's totally different. I get that. But it did sit weird with me. Like the idea that universal education should be for every Christian child in such and such a way. It just really isn't true though. You know what I'm saying? Am I making any sense?
Expand on that a little bit. Maybe restate what you just said in a different way.
What they were trying to say was there should be no universal like it's not a right to have universal education over here, but they were trying to normalize it within the Christian realm. And I was trying to think of it in terms of reality though. Is that true? Because every family has differences. Some fathers' jobs take them away more, so parents homeschool to travel with their dad. I was trying to think in terms of, should that be normalized? Should universal education, should universal classical school education be normalized within Christianity? Is that a right?
Yes.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think we do need to distinguish between rights and ideals.
Yeah.
Because a right means that you can lawfully demand it of somebody else to provide it for you, and you are just to do so. Yeah. Whereas an ideal would be something where you'd say, it would be best if we could get to a place where everybody received such and such.
So Ephesians does require parents to give their children, train them up in the admonition of the Lord. But that doesn't mean it looks like an actual 4-walled classroom setting.
Right.
Or for every year of their schooling to look like that.
Yeah. Here's some of the broad like sketches of how I'm thinking about this issue right now. I think we have to say education is an inescapable concept, meaning everybody will receive some kind of education. Whether that's school, homeschool, the education of being abandoned by your parents, and like everybody's going to have some kind of education. And I would also say that universal education is here to stay culturally. And so Christians ought to be pioneering in institution building and pioneering pathways of education that are competitors with the government schools and public schooling, with the long aim of, if we are going to have universal education, we should want it to be universal Christian education in a Christian nation. I think that's what we like, long time horizon, what we're aiming for. Let me talk a little bit about universal education and then add in a layer of nuance and additional layer when it comes to particularly sexual egalitarianism, like sexed piety, boys and girls. Well, hey, everybody, consider this your official invite to join us here in Ogden, Utah for our annual New Christendom Press Conference this June 12th to the 14th. We're going to be having a great time. Lots of great speakers, live episode of The King's Hall, live episode of Haunted Cosmos. I'll be putting on a concert, a singles mixer, a pastor's breakfast, a business mixer, a VIP hangout. We've got it all, and you need to go to newchristendompress.com/2025, link in the description, to get tickets and more information. We hope to see you there. What are you waiting for? Are you tired of Christian books that are shallow? For nearly 30 years, Founders Ministries has been publishing resources that encourage the recovery of the gospel and the reformation of local churches. With over 100 titles, there are books that address systematic, historical, pastoral, and practical theology. Whether you're looking for your kid's next board book or a larger theological work, you can find it at press.founders.org and use code HEARTH, that's all caps, HEARTH, for 10% off your order. Here at Bright Hearth, we're all about helping you not turn into a girl if you're a boy, or into a boy if you're a girl. You know what might be doing that to you? The soap in your shower. And so we are pleased to introduce you to IndigoSundrySoap.com, link in the description, of course, who can provide you with soaps and more without any of the nasty stuff. And because they love you, they're giving you a discount code, guys. So use code, all caps, Bright Hearth, for 10% off your whole order. Support this great Christian company and support Bright Hearth Podcast at the same time. Check them out at IndigoSundrySoap.com. And of course, that link is in the description.
If you're like me, you grew up on beef jerky. It was a must-have for any road trip. But most beef jerky is loaded with sugar, soy, and nitrates. Ew. Farmer Bill's is a Christian-owned meat snacks company in South Dakota that offers pasture-raised meat snacks. They make biltong. It's like beef jerky, but air-dried with clean ingredients and way better. The pre-sliced biltong is perfect for protein on the go, and the slab is great for snacking or hosting a party. It's like a large, dry-aged ribeye with perfect marbling of fat.
Go to farmerbillsprovisions.com or click the link in the description below and use code BRIGHT to save 20% off your order today.
Farmer Bill's Provisions, the perfect protein snack.
So universal education is very new, historically speaking. We have to recognize that for the vast majority of history, including Christian history in the West, very few people were educated formally in the way that we think about education. So all Christians have pretty much agreed for all time that parents have an obligation to disciple their children, and I would put education as a sub-genre or sub-discipline of discipleship.
Mm-hmm.
But most people didn't formally educate their children in the way we think of, like with grammar school, secondary school, learning math, science, literature, history, K through 12, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Through the Middle Ages, through the medieval period, literacy rates, according to our best understanding, were somewhere around 5% in Christian West, up to 10% or so. That's through the 1500s.
Mm-hmm.
Generally, what would happen for this period of time, for that 1500-year period of time, is that two classes of people would typically be educated. The clergy, so people going into ministry, pastors, bishops, that sort of thing, and also nobility, so statesmen, courtiers, lords, princes, those of the rich and noble class would have been educated. Leaders of men, in other words, and typically males of those two groups. Because obviously...
Can I ask a question real quick? Because then you hear people say that, well, that's because they were trying to oppress the lower classes. Is that actually what was going on?
It had a lot more to do with the structure of society, and the reason that changed also, and maybe I can explain that for a minute here, like that was also structural. It wasn't just ideological things that moved us to universal education, people deciding like we should do this. it was also economic and scientific and structural changes to nations and economies that allowed for it. So from that, in that 1500-year period, you would have, it wasn't that the commoner wasn't getting an education. They were just getting an education in the duties and vocation which they were going to pursue. So young men would grow up and they would be with mom a lot, in their early years, helping in the household, and the household's often connected to the trade or business or farming or whatever it is. They would be deeply connected to that, to mom. And then boys would get to a certain age and they would begin to go into the trade, often of their father or of another man in the community, sometimes going out to go learn a trade or a business endeavor that would be their vocation. And that is their education. They're going how to perform the vocation of their father. Let's keep it simple like that. So that is education. It's just not education in reading, writing, arithmetic. It's education in a vocation.
Even like Queen Elizabeth, when she became queen very young, it was sort of scandalous because she hadn't been given the education of a royal ruler. And so a lot of people thought she was not going to be equipped for it because she didn't have the right proper training for it.
Because that was what the other pathway would be.
Yes.
If you were going into the clergy or if you were of the nobility, then you would receive a training, what we think of like broadly as classical education now, which was training in reading, certainly in writing, but also in rhetoric, in the liberal arts, in the trivium and quadrivium, in music, and then in some particulars of your profession. So nobility would learn sometimes martial skills, physical training. They would learn basically court manners. They would learn something related to in other words, everybody's actually training for their vocation. Everybody was receiving an education for their vocation, but only a very few people required, quote unquote, at that time, reading, writing, arithmetic, you could say, for their vocation.
Like the full classical curriculum as we view it today.
Totally. So most people literally couldn't read. Like upwards of 95% of people in the middle age, in that time, couldn't read. Upwards of 90%. Like there's differing numbers. So then that brings us to about 1500. The Protestant Reformation. And one of the doctrines of the Protestant Reformation that it was focused on was the priesthood of all believers. So these ideas that Christians ought to have direct access to the scriptures, that they should be reading and understanding it themselves, that they should not have a mediation of a priest between them and God, though the Protestant Reformation, of course, affirms Christian leadership as we see it in Scripture, but it also affirms another thing we see in Scripture, which is that we're a kingdom of priests. All Christians are a royal priesthood. So we all have direct access to God through Christ, and there are certain implications of this. If you think that everybody is a priest, then priests ought to be able to handle Scripture. And what is the bare minimum requirement to do that?
Reading.
Literacy. So you have influential men like John Amos Comenius, who is a 17th century. He was born in the late 16th century, but grew up and did most of his work, did his work in the 17th century. Comenius he's a Moravian, from a sect, like basically a branch of the Reformed world that was the Unity of the Brethren, which became the Moravians, which most people are probably at least familiar, have heard that term.
I think they're like Bohemian, aren't they?
Yeah, they're from what is now Czech, Czech Republic, but it's from Moravia was the region. He was not from a wealthy family or anything, John Comenius, and his Czech or his original language name is different, but most people, they call him John Amos Comenius.
Hey, that'd be a good boy's name.
Comenius or John?
John Amos. I like that.
That's a good name.
We're still looking for boy names, guys.
Yeah, Lexi's looking for boy names for our next one after this one. Since we can name this one. Inside joke. Okay. Comenius, he became involved, though his education began later in life, like his teens. He had a great aptitude for learning. So he was one of these guys who's just very smart. He's a Protestant. He ends up going to college, university, learning Latin and all the classical learning that one would learn in that time. And he became interested in a movement that was called the Pan-Sophic movement. And the Pan-Sophic movement was You hear the word sophic in there, like wisdom, sophistry.
Like post-sophistry?
It was basically an idea of organizing all human learning into a cohesive whole. So it's trying to understand all things in a systematic way.
Okay.
This was in the air at that time. You have Francis Bacon doing this with science. You have René Descartes doing this with philosophy. Comenius is as influential in the field of educational theory as Bacon is in science, and
okay, that makes total
Descartes
sense
is in
then.
philosophy.
Okay.
So Comenius, he does a lot of things. And to keep a long story short, he wrote a book called the Didactica Magna, which means the Great Didactic. And it was his attempt at a pan-sophic view of educational theory. How to do a whole system of education.
Which isn't necessarily bad, because my understanding of like science, Francis Bacon wanting to do stuff like that was because they saw that there was order in the universe because of God, and they're trying to order classes of things. And so he's probably trying to do the same thing, but with education. Okay.
Yes. He actually wrote another book. It's probably a more famous book. It's called the Orbis Pictus. And it's widely agreed to be the very first illustrated children's textbook. So it had pictures, and it was a textbook for children, which was a new idea. I do think I've seen this. You probably have. It was used for centuries in many nations after Comenius, even after he died. It's hugely influential in the history of education. Textbooks weren't necessarily a normal thing the way he wrote this, where you bring together knowledge from a lot of people into like a textbook. Mm-hmm. Like that really wasn't the main way people thought about books at the time. No. Now you think you're in the 17th century, you're post-printing press. There's more widely available printed materials, things like that. But in Didactica Magna, the Great Didactic, he developed essentially what we think of today as education. Kindergarten, primary school, secondary school, even university. He laid out this whole system, basically what we do today. And he argued strenuously for something revolutionary at the time, which is this. He said, quote, "Not the children of the rich or the powerful only, but of all alike, boys and girls, both noble and ignoble, rich and poor, in all cities and towns, villages and hamlets, should be sent to school. Universal education." And this idea took root. Now, in the King's Hall of the Cold Open, you could go listen to that if you're interested in more detail here. But basically, along with the 17th century, we see a rise in overall literacy as printed materials become more available. People are now more interested in reading. It becomes more normal to have printed materials available in normal trades. So now we see like 20 to 40% literacy rates. Then we have the first industrial revolution, really affected Britain most deeply. Second industrial revolution brings us to about 1914, and that affects all of the European continent and America. By the end of this period, the Industrial Revolution has completely disrupted that normal life and household and economy of people learning their father's trade and training in their education primarily for that vocation. Now we have the introduction of this idea of basically a less rooted and more discontinuity approach, where now people are growing up and studying a profession largely different, and education is expanding. In the 1800s, England and America both passed compulsory education laws.
And when was the Great Depression?
The Great Depression then was the final nail in the coffin.
The 40s?
It was 1929 to 39.
Okay.
But you have, in the 1800s, compulsory education. All the way through the early 20th century, this only took you through what we would think of as like grammar school. So primary school. Well, then Great Depression hits. And at that time, like in the 1920s or the early 1900s, I think 75% of students, something like that, did not go to high school.
Yeah, after the age of like 12 or 13, it was pretty normative that there was not school.
Yes.
Unless it was like you were well off, private school was an option, that sort of stuff.
So prior to the 1930s, 70% of U.S. students didn't continue their formal education into high school. They entered the workforce or the home. During the Great Depression, in an attempt to keep young men out of the workforce, to not compete for scarce jobs with grown men,
yes,
they said, let's expand universal education and publicly fund it. So now we have compulsory education through high school. Virtually within a decade becomes totally normal. We think of that as totally normal now. So think about the transformations there since the 17th century, and especially the 19th and 20th century. All of a sudden, we think it's totally normal to educate everybody pretty much the same way through age 18, and now even more and more through 22, 24, with pretty normal, like higher rates of college attendance.
Which is why when I heard a Christian arguing from that, knowing I had read mostly historic views of education at that point. The whole idea of modern American classical education was really brand new to me.
Yeah.
But that's why I had a big question mark when I heard them say that, because I'm like, but I know that hasn't been normative
exactly
in history.
So briefly, there are lots of good things to say about this, and there's also some challenges for us. I think universal education is here to stay, and I think it should be.
Mm-hmm.
Again, Protestants largely were behind a lot of this.
Yes.
We've talked before, I believe, about the Old Deluder Satan Act, the Massachusetts Bay Colony in the 17th century in America, that mandated teachers basically teaching literacy in communities with 50 households, and then a full grammar school in communities with 100 households or more. This is pre-Revolution America, colonial America. We had laws like this that ultimately became our system of universal public education, funded by law, by taxation. So this really was like basically a Christian idea rooted in some Christian beliefs and principles. Stephen Wolf's point on Twitter recently was to say that more or less we have to recognize that actually does change the dynamic and way we need to be thinking when we now think about something like classical education. Since classical education historically then was the method of educating clergy and nobility. 95% of people did not receive that education because it was for a particular thing, the leading of men, leadership of men in the church and in the civil realm. So then when we move to educate everybody, which is a good thing, I think that the Protestants are correct about that literacy should be normative. All of our boys and girls we should have access to the great tradition of the West. All these things are true. The human soul expands to the size of the glories it beholds. All these things are true. I'm not saying no one should learn to read, but what we have to recognize...
Oh, great. I can just see the YouTube videos
Yeah,
now.
just wait. What I am saying, though, and we've been thinking about this for some time, is that when you now go and educate everybody, you have to think, actually, though, not everybody is going to be in the clergy or the nobility. So part of your educational paradigm has to account for this, lest we become egalitarians, who act like everybody's the same, anybody can be anything, you can be anything you put your mind to. No, you can't. Not everybody is given 10 talents of ability when it comes to the leadership of men. Not everybody should be studying Latin until they're 24. Yep. Not everybody should be pursuing law. Some people, actually, probably the majority of people, do need a certain amount of education, but at some point in their development, and I think this begins to happen somewhere around secondary school, they need to begin to identify generally where they're going and narrow it down as they go along and tailor their education to the duties and vocations they're pursuing. So that you're trying to basically create with the liberal arts free men who do know their own tradition, know their history, have the tools of learning in their tool belt. They can read well, write well, speak well, think well, especially insofar as that's mapped onto their personal wiring as God made them. But then we're not actually treating all of them like they're going to become little pastors, little lawyers, little statesmen, because they're just not. Not everybody is going to start a business or be a leader of men. A lot of people are going to work for somebody else, and that's actually fine because we're not egalitarians.
Yeah.
One quick note, I've talked about this a lot, but one quick note on sexed piety then. So we've got...
I have some devil's advocate questions.
Yeah.
Just because.
So we've got boys and girls now, and then that's another layer, because we have the hierarchy of God made some with minds that are geared much more towards academic pursuits and some towards like trade pursuits. There's lots of variegation there. Then you add in the basic watershed distinction of maleness and femaleness. The vocation of a man is not the same as the vocation of a woman, and so their education ought to reflect that over time. So that's another layer, and this is John Moody's point often, is that many classical schools and Christian co-ops and things like that, we inadequately account for sexed distinctions in our educational paradigm.
And that's not, again, it's not to like oppress women.
No.
It's to better equip them to do what they're supposed to be doing.
So as an example, like we are not in Ogden setting our young ladies up to have the expectation that success for them looks like getting a liberal arts degree.
Correct.
Leaving home, going and getting a liberal arts degree so that they can, no, that's generally not where we're pointing our young ladies. Now, are we educating them? Of course we're educating them. We want we want them to be a glory and to be very intelligent, and they are. And they're, like Lexy is no slouch. We're not trying to raise illiterates or something like that. But we are saying that increasingly as boys and girls turn into young men and young women and then turn into men and women, we want to be shaping them for the vocation to which they are called and heading. So I think these things need to show up in the way that we order our homes and our schools and our co-ops and our homeschooling. In a nutshell, this is like Charlotte Mason makes this point that children are persons. We're noticing, like I can already tell you by age 6 or 5 in our household, kind of what a kid is like. By the time they're 12, you're starting to get a really good picture of what they're like and what they're really gifted at and what they're not really gifted at. And you can begin to like have fatherly and motherly conversations that are shaping them towards that. Like, hey, son, you have a really strong mind for this thing. You might be headed for this kind of vocation, and not pigeonholing them or like forcing them into a mold that we come up with and like we get really attached to, but noticing like what kind of kid you're working with. And then whether it's a boy or girl, thinking about how am I encouraging them to grow in their loves? And so I know you have some devil's advocate questions or maybe some more. What kind of thoughts do you have?
Some of the books would say you as a parent are not having a growth mindset then for your child if you're just kind of settling for them to not be a leader, or you're not actually trusting that God can grow them in those ways, which I do think that's also possible. Genuinely true.
Yeah, that's a ditch you could fall in.
What would your answer be then?
Yeah, so my answer is that all of this we have to think clearly and with nuanced distinction, because there's ditches everywhere. What I'm saying is that there's this ditch of universal education of inadequately accounting for hierarchy.
Yes.
And so failing to reckon that not everybody's going to be needing to learn Latin till they're 20. We actually teach Latin to all of our students. I think that's good. But I wouldn't say that all of them need it all the way through age 24. We just graduated a student early, for example, so they could get married and continue in the 2 jobs they already had that they were doing quite well at.
That made more sense than forcing them to keep studying flashcards.
I didn't go, you need to keep doing Latin, though. I said, great job, you've become a man. Go, and now I'm doing his premarital counseling. Great. Like that's how this is. So yeah, there's a ditch here. But at the same time, someone could hear what I'm saying and inadequately account for a ditch on the other side of the road, which would be to basically decide that a kid is a ditch digger when they're 12 and be like, no, you're only good for digging ditches. Put down the books, kid, and go do manual labor. That's absolutely not what I'm saying. Yeah,
the conversation I have with most young moms who are coming to me concerned that is their son or daughter, I always encourage them.
Oh, yeah.
You are not thinking highly enough about this. Do not pigeonhole them as the dyslexic right now or as the...
Yes. The teachers told my parents I had a learning disability till like 2nd grade. And then by 4th grade, I was reading at a high school level. It's just, it took a turn, and boys are like this. They sometimes develop later intellectually or on some of these things. So I would say we want, like I want people who are in the trades, who are like really, they're passionate and fitted for the trades, which is hard, good work, and it takes intelligence, is that, I also want them to be able to read well, have these tools of learning on their belt so they can be lifelong learners. But I also don't want to pretend like all of them need to have the same interest in academic theology as the clergy, because they actually don't. Like pastors need to uphold the life and the doctrine of the church, and they have a particular job and calling and aptitude, hopefully, for that. And pastors can make the mistake, and I think classical educators can make the same mistake, because they tend to be very passionate about these things.
Matter,
which is good. That's contagious, but they can inadequately account for the variegation that God has built into the world, and then despise actually other giftings or try to force everybody into that same mold. And the point that Stephen was making, Dr. Wolf was making, is that when you move to universal education, he was commenting on a post from a CEO of a classical learning business. It was like a testing business. And that CEO had noted that education can't just be about getting a job, but that's how most people think about education, is that it's like what you do to get a job later. And that's true. But then Stephen noted, but when you move to universal education, that actually is one of the most important things education is teaching people to do, is to get a job. Because that's the vocation they're pursuing, that they're going to need to pursue. When classical education was still classical, like when it was back in the 1500s, the reason that it wasn't primarily focused on getting a job is because literally everybody doing it was either rich and didn't need a job, they were going to be nobility, or they were clergy, and so they were preparing for that exact job in their education. So today you can't just say, live in this like ivory tower idea that getting a job has nothing to do with education. It's like, of course it does. Of course it does. For most people, of course. What world do you live in? My sons are going to need to be able to either get a job or make a job. And the point the classical people are trying to say is, yeah, but if they can read well, write well, speak well, think well, they can do any job well. That's true.
Yes,
I agree with that. Totally agree with that. But at the same time, a lot of the people we're educating, their education needs to help them get a job.
They will, if like there's a Mason quote about it's about how much the child cares, not how much they know, but how much they care about the subject. If a child's moral education is developed enough, they will care enough to want to excel in their vocational training.
Yes.
And to value that.
So long story short, I think this is just something we need to be aware of. We're thinking about it on our school board. We're talking about, from the very beginning, we didn't have the resources to do this. So you start with what you can, but we intend to make our secondary school a girls and a boys school over time. And there are other things we're working on to account for some of these things and hopefully help shepherd all of our people, the ones who are destined for the leadership of men and the ones who aren't destined for that exact vocation, to do well. Everyone has to rule his own spirit. Everyone has to lead in a sense. But not everybody is made to be a leader of men, and that's okay. That is a false ideal that crushes people whom God did not fit for that duty. You're being an egalitarian. You're just being an elite egalitarian where you think everybody's elite.
I think this probably helps some homeschool families feel good about understanding they have limited resources and time, and mom's, schedule, health, so much to steward, that when you take into consideration what the average family did to educate their child, most homeschool moms are doing pretty great, even if they're not able to check all the boxes that the local school says they should be checking. You know what I mean? Yeah. So I hope that's an encouragement to.
Yes. Attention business owners. Proverbs tells us, in the multitude of counselors, there is victory. At KeepWise Partners, we aim to apply this principle to your business as you work to build Christendom in your labors. Running a small business is challenging, but you don't have to go it alone. KeepWise Partners offers expert bookkeeping services with the care and integrity you'd expect from a partner who shares your values. And to take it a step further, our advisory services bring invaluable insights to you as you aim to meet your business goals. Visit keepwisepartners.com or call Derrick Taylor at 781-680-8000 to schedule a free consultation. KeepWise Partners, bringing finance and accounting excellence to the way you build your business. Are you tired of not feeling well and of having your doctor treat your symptoms without taking the time to investigate what's really going on? Rebecca Belch at Live Oak Integrative Health is here to help. Rebecca is passionate about helping women and families achieve the health that God designed in our bodies to have. With more than 20 years of experience as a critical care and labor and delivery nurse, she now serves as a licensed practitioner of functional medicine. Her goal is to address the root causes of dysfunction in your body and to help give your body what it needs so that you can create a legacy of health that extends to your children and grandchildren. She provides a wide range of testing options to uncover your underlying health issues, such as fatigue, weight gain, and gut problems. Then she works with you to develop a plan that focuses on nutrition, hormone balance, and long-term habits to promote enduring health. She also specializes in health for women who will become or currently are pregnant. This time is often overlooked and is the most important window to create generational health. Check out her website to book a free discovery call right now and get a $50 discount on any of her service options. You can do this on her website, liveoakintegrativehealth.com. Hey friends, let's talk about Gray Toad Tallow. They're a family-owned small business dedicated to making products that nourish your skin with the purest, most wholesome ingredients. For centuries, people have experienced the moisturizing and healing properties of tallow, and Gray Toad Tallow is committed to sharing these benefits their family has experienced with you. Besides their commitment to offering you a healthy skincare option for your family, Gray Toad Tallow's desire is to remain affordable and accessible to be a blessing to others. For more information and to try a balm sample pack, visit graytoadtallow.com. That link will be in the description along with this code, which we would urge you not to forget to use for 15% off your order. That code is all caps, BRIGHT15, BRIGHT15 for 15% off your order, and we truly appreciate your business. If you have a young family like me, you work hard every day to ensure you care for your wife and kids. Providing for a young family is challenging with rising costs. It doesn't look like things are going to change in the future. Maybe you've thought like I have, I wish I'd started investing years ago. My family would be in a better financial position. As they say about trees, the best time to plant a tree was 10 years ago. The second best time is today. Don't let the benefit of time go to waste on your financial planning for retirement or inheritance for your generations. Joe Garrissey with Backwards Planning Financial has been working with us to make the best plan for our family. He's a Christian who works with one of the largest and most trusted financial service companies in the world. He's been helping Lexi and I work towards our financial goals and helps us navigate the complexities of the markets. Whether you have millions in assets or you're just starting to invest, Joe Garrissey can help you reach your goals to grow the kingdom and leave a good legacy for your generations. Visit backwardspanningfinancial.com. That's backwardspanningfinancial.com, or call 615-767-2555 to speak with Joe to prepare for the future. The testimonials presented may not be representative of the experience of other clients and are not a guarantee of future performance or success. Okay, next question. Hi, and we will not spend 30 minutes on each one of these. It says, hi, Brian and Lexy. Congratulations on expecting your 7th. I'm in my first trimester with my first baby, and I'm looking for books on biblical discipline. My husband and I are trying to get on the same page with our parenting strategy and philosophy. I didn't grow up in a community or a home where spanking was okay. I'm adopted. It was not allowed due to suspected family violence history. This is, I won't add all the personal details, but this is a normal thing with adoptions. They said, I've never witnessed high standards for behavior or consistent discipline of any type. My husband, on the other hand, came from a home where spanking was used, and even the elders of the church spanked other people's children if they caught them misbehaving. We don't even do that at Refuge, so wow, that is
But I
extra.
know it's a thing.
It is a thing. I've heard this before. I know schools that have in loco parentis, they have permission to discipline. We don't do that. It says, my husband's parents have also remarked that spanking did not really work on my husband like it did their other children. They go to a conservative rural church. All of their peers with children spank semi-publicly, so it seems pretty normal in their culture. It's made it a hard topic for them to get clear on. They're very pro-discipline, but struggling to think through strategies. Resources would be amazing. Blessings. The book we always recommend to people that's just like quick and dirty. It's not complicated. It's not long-winded. It's extremely practical. And it doesn't leave you wondering how to do what it's talking about, is Reb Bradley's Child Training Tips. I think it's a great starting point for just about anybody, because a lot of books or, topics on discipline will say, well, you need a spank, and then they leave it at that. They don't explain, how does that look? Like, they say you need a discipline for this, but then they don't explain how. The Reb Bradley book is like, here is exactly how to train your children. It doesn't leave you any nuance or room for like wiggling out. So I think it's a good starting point. Do you have anything that you'd add?
I mean, even if your in-laws say it didn't work for your husband, but if the rest of his siblings are normal, godly, they have their own families, they're raising their own children well, let them be a real life resource. Because I think that can be really helpful too, is like somebody you know that knows your disposition and your child's disposition can explain to you, well, here's how you do continue to be faithful to discipline, even when that child is prone to cry for 10 minutes afterwards.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yep.
And to just have people just that see you doing it day in and day out, just continue to encourage you, like, stay the course. It will not be this way always. So I would say just if you have, it sounds like you do have in-person examples, then lean into that. The other person I always really like, I do still like Why Children Matter. I like the Q&A at the end of there, but I love Matt Whitling's resources on parenting because he has 7 kids and I think 6 of them are boys.
Wow.
If I remember correctly.
Can you remind me who that is?
He's I don't know if he still is. He's been the headmaster at Logos for years and years and years.
Okay. Yeah.
So he has
a lot of hands-on experience.
There's a series he did on Canon that's called Spring Cleaning that covers a wide variety of specific sins and really practical on discipline according to different ages.
Okay.
So I found that one, now that we have a wide variety of ages, I found that one super practical and refreshing. And I just think he has a really like realistic view of what large family life and discipline actually looks like with a lot of people.
Yeah. Which is totally different, not totally different. The principles are the same, but it can be like sometimes people with lots of kids, like our family, it's easy. You know, you look at a family with like 2 kids, people giving advice, or you go, that's, you know, it's still true.
Yeah.
But there can be gaps in the practical because there's more wrinkles the more people you get.
Yeah. And
like
just
you have different dynamics.
Lots of different varieties of personalities. And
oh, yeah.
So anyways,
gamut.
I really love that Spring Cleaning series. And that was Katie Wilkie that recommended that to me.
Oh, awesome. Yeah.
So,
love the Wilkies.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. We've gotten this question. I'm going to summarize it because I have several examples of the same question, basically. We did an episode maybe in season 1, maybe later, on the sexually warm wife. And it was like...
Yeah, that was later.
We were talking about what it looks like to be sexually inviting to your husband, not cold, basically cultivating the attitude of, how can I show my husband that I want to be his sole source of sexual satisfaction? Like we did a whole episode on that. I think it's one of our bigger episodes of all time. Like, obviously. Yeah, all the husbands are like, babe, you should listen to Bright Hearth. It's a really good podcast. I mean, like the whole thing.
Oh, so funny.
Maybe just start with this episode. I don't know. Husbands, we see you. We're here for you.
No, I think wives like it too.
Mainly, actually, I've gotten feedback like on our little portal, mostly wives. But this one is kind of asking about, which is, this is a common issue. It's not as rare as we sometimes think it is, but basically, like, what about encouraging a sexually warm husband? Like, what if your husband has low libido?
Okay.
What if your husband's like rarely seems sexually interested? And in all these versions of this question, everyone's making clear we're not talking about pornography use. We're not talking about, it's not that he has low libido, it's that he's sinning somewhere else.
Yeah.
They're being very clear. Husband's not looking at porn. He just doesn't seem to be sexually interested. Some of the questions mention we're looking at hormones, like, but some of them he will even say, we've had hormone testing, it's normal, or we've corrected it and it still isn't an issue.
Oh, interesting.
So how do we think about this? What would we encourage? And I think from the beginning, it's important to recognize that everybody we're not all stamped with the exact same everything. So in marriage, it's important to keep the command in front of you because that's the standard, to not deprive one another, but to come together often, lest you be tempted. And reasons to not do this would be by agreement for a short time for the sake of prayer.
Mm-hmm.
So biblical precedent is that sex should be regular, normal, prevent temptation, and it should be only not done by agreement. And you should be praying. So the principle a lot of people land on, I think it's a wise principle in general, is to say that whoever has the higher sex drive, they are the ones who the frequency should be determined by that, because that seems to fit the principle of the purpose of preventing temptation. I would say that a husband who has a lower libido than his wife should work to meet her libido, not only think about sex when he thinks about it. He should actually be proactive and kind of simple as. Do you have any thoughts from a wife's side or
No,
you know,
that's what I was going to say is I always think of that. The spouse with the higher sex drive sets the pace.
Yeah. And this can be hard because for a wife, the dynamic is different. She doesn't want to like nag her husband to have sex with her.
Yeah.
Husbands, I think, need to be aware that that's really embarrassing for your wife. Like she doesn't want to have to do that. And she doesn't want to shame you either.
And because the dynamic, I mean, obviously husbands and wives find physical pleasure from it. And both of them also find emotional satisfaction in it.
Yeah.
But it does sway towards the emotional closeness for a woman. So that can be hard because it can be like, well, not only does he want to be around me physically, but it also seems like emotionally, he's kind of leaving me over here to wither away. So just being aware of that too, like that is very real.
Yeah.
Like God created her with that. So
yeah. And he needs to think like knowing your wife, being concerned for her is a lot of this. I think for a wife is like, is he paying attention to her generally? Is he like flirtatious with her? Is he showing interest in her? Because those are ways that a wife receives love typically.
Yeah.
It's why I think the euphemism for sex early in the Bible is to know. And it's specifically that the husband knows the wife is the direction it goes. Because husbands often can fail to do this, where a wife receives love by being known by her husband. He's paying attention, drawing near, interested, flirtatious. Like he's knowing her. Mm-hmm. So he's pursuing her. So husbands, I mean, really just need to repent if that's an issue. Like if this is a consistent issue. Now, obviously there are seasons of life, like babies are just born, pregnancy, you have a health issue, like sometimes job schedules. I know guys that work nights. Man, guys that work nights have it rough.
That would stink.
Because you just have this horrible mismatched schedule.
Yeah, I've not thought about that. But
it lowers testosterone. True. Like there's all kinds of hindrances. And then you need to be patient and love one another. And don't act like when you're in a season like that, try not to doomsday and go like, it's always going to be like this. No, it's hard. And both of you have to work harder because of that and just go, it's okay to have a rhythm to life, but it shouldn't be a rut. Mm-hmm. I think is the way that
which is why I think that's why it's important to cultivate those other habits and other people say it all the time, like sex basically begins in some ways it is true at the kitchen sink. I understand that people take that the wrong way and it's manipulation if you don't do
it's not
what
about
I
doing
want.
The dishes.
No, it's not. But at the same time, it really does
being flirty with your spouse. That's
so
thinking that they look nice in that,
do you like
apron.
Your spouse?
Thinking they look nice when they cooking at that that oven.
I like my spouse.
I like my spouse too. People are going to complain in the reviews if we keep flirting though. Okay, let's see. Let's do it.
I'm still not over that big ball comment you made a few weeks ago.
Big ball comment. Oh, that you're on your big ball? Well, you have it right here.
Oh man.
What did I can't even remember. It was about your yoga ball though.
Yeah, and I just thought I've been thinking about it for weeks. Like, why did he have to say that?
Because I'm a dope. Okay. When does Lexy's new book come out?
Oh.
We don't know yet. We're working on it, but we are aiming for, I believe that we set a target date for late summer.
Really?
Because
that is sooner than I was expecting.
Something like that. We have another book right now in the pipe. We have actually several other books in the pipeline. And we needed to say, like, we've gotten this book to the point it needs to be. Now let's shift and finish these other projects and then get that one done. We will keep, you guys will be the first to know on Bright Hearth, obviously, because you are the OG.
I'm going to guess be really good. October, November is what I'm going to guess.
It could be. Yeah, it certainly could be. Let's do another quick one and then one more like medium one and we'll call it. So the two quick ones. How does Lexy work out while pregnant? I tried a soft pregnancy approved workout, but I was nauseous for the whole day afterwards.
Ooh, I wonder what that means. Soft pregnancy approved.
Like one of those, this is a pregnancy workout.
Okay, so I was already strength training before I got pregnant, which probably changes things.
Would recommend for all women.
But I will say when I first started, I felt terrible, even not pregnant. And I remember going to Jerry and Eric Kahn, like, guys, help me. I feel like death and I feel angry all the time. It really did. I was thinking about this. I don't know how long it took, but I'm not currently working out at the moment because I'm trying to not have a baby for another week or two. But just, I think due to aging and having so many children, I kind of have to work out like 4 to 5 days a week to not be in pain. So do with that what you will. But I would say it took maybe like 10 weeks of me consistently doing that to go from like angry, feeling sick to like, no, there's actually an endorphin flow happening here. So maybe if you're in first trimester and you're nauseous already, then that's not the time to start doing that. But I just have some friends. I mean, I feel like we're really blessed at the church. We have a lot of professionals in this realm. And so I have a friend that he kind of does this for part of his living, and his wife was pregnant at the same time. And he was just kind of giving tips on how to modify for pregnancy.
Yeah.
So I was simply doing, what are they called, Brian? You know more than me. When I switched from kettlebells fully to barbells, I was doing squats weighted on my back.
Yep.
And then deadlifts. Is that what I was
Deadlifts.
doing? Deadlifts.
Yep.
And then
Rows.
rows.
Barbell rows.
Okay. Yeah. Rows. I was trying to do pull-ups, but then I got too big in the belly to do that.
And you were doing like banded pull-ups.
Yeah, I was doing banded pull-ups. So that's kind of it. And then I started incorporating like labor stretching and labor prep and stuff like that. So, but if you want a program, the 2 programs I would recommend, you could get the super old school program, Baby Bells. Their website is so outdated, but I did pay for the program for kettlebells, and I did that through the first and second trimester. But again, before your belly gets too big, you can kind of just go with I think my opinion is you can just go with a normal, like strength training program. It's really once you start feeling your abs weaken that you need to be more careful.
Yeah.
The book I got that was really helpful, it's called Training for Two. She actually dispelled a lot of myths surrounding exercise, like no hands above the head, you're going to rip your placenta out of place, bed rest is always the answer. There was a lot of really, really helpful stuff in there with updated science. So I would recommend that. And they have a program you can pay for that I've been doing just in the 3rd trimester that's called Mama Stay Fit. And it's, they have tons of YouTube videos. But I just wanted to my personality wants to check all the boxes. So I just paid for you can pay per trimester. I just paid for the 3rd trimester, and it's all labor prep strength training. So that's been really good. So that's kind of the long and short of it.
Nice.
Yeah.
Okay. Another real quick one. What is the fertility thermometer Lexi wears? That sounded really interesting and would be so helpful. I get it for you every night when you're wearing it. And I know what it looks like, but I can't remember the name of it. Temp drop, yes.
So here's my thoughts on temp drop, guys.
Yeah, let's hear it, baby. I mean, it obviously.
I've had it for several years now, and I do think it works. But when something happened right around the time we moved, maybe I just lost it for a little bit or something. I just went back to the regular fertility thermometer under the tongue, and it wasn't like the temp drop was any better. It just tracked it for me all night, but I could still see the general patterns by just temping in the morning.
It was an easy, you put it on and you just don't have to think about it.
The idea of the temp drop is that when you're up at night with babies or sick children, you get a more reliable read. But I don't feel like I did get pregnant right after that.
Yes, you sure did.
I really don't feel though like it was I couldn't see the pattern.
Sure.
So I guess if you want to be extra careful, but I feel comfortable and confident. And the reason I say that is because I have a friend also pregnant with her 7th, who has only ever used the under the tongue for years and years and years. And I know she's had a lot harder sleepers than I have as children, and she has still been very on top of understanding her fertility patterns. So I just kind of felt like maybe I don't need all the high tech stuff like I thought I did.
Yeah, I know there's more and more of these tools, and all they really do is help you get the information with natural family planning. You still have to know.
You still have to do the work.
Know what to do and figure that.
And it wasn't because I switched to a different thermometer that I got pregnant.
No.
So.
Okay,
I just made it sound like that was why.
Last question. We'll end it with this one.
Okay.
This is actually a tricky one. It says, how should you exercise authority over your wife differently than you exercise authority over your kids? We are coming from the evangelical church, are new parents and new to Reformed faith and patriarchal gender roles. Sometimes I feel like my husband is trying to use his authority over me the same way he would over the kids. Yeah, real thing. I think, and it's you shouldn't feel dumb that it's hard, like it takes figuring out, because these are, if you haven't had it modeled, like people who saw what it looks like to have a strong fatherly leader in the home and who loved and led his wife well for their whole upbringing, and a mother who was warm and respectful to her husband. And, you saw all this in lots of different situations. Like, what it looked like for mom and dad to be frustrated, or like for them to have a challenge, or for that, you've kind of seen it. All of a sudden, when you go, husband's supposed to lead and he's supposed to be an authority, and wife is supposed to submit to him and respect him, you can go, how? And then your first attempts can end up, a husband who hasn't been leading can like start to try to lead and not do a great job, but also a husband can start to lead and the wife hasn't been led before, and she's like, ooh, any leadership is actually domineering, and I feel like you're treating me like a child.
That's what I was going to say, is the few times, I mean, in general, I feel like you don't have to ever coerce me into doing anything. I'm very convivial towards you. But I don't know if when a husband actually has to take a stand in authority and point something out to his wife, or say, no, absolutely not, I don't know if that will ever go away this side of heaven. The flesh will always feel like, well, don't patronize me.
Yes.
So as a wife, I would stop and be like, hold on a second, I probably shouldn't be reacting that way.
Yes, I think that's probably the very first thing to understand.
Especially if it's new to you.
Yeah, is that if you have your husband exercise legitimate lawful authority in the home in correcting you,
mm-hmm.
you are probably not going to immediately like it.
And I said this last week, I immediately start asking myself, run through a list of questions when I feel that way.
Yeah, like let's say that your husband, let me give you a real scenario.
Trying to think of a real...
Yeah, let's say that a husband has seen that his wife is having a very hard time in a week, and that she has been really short-tempered with everybody and been kind of grouchy. And he, on the Thursday night, it's 4 days into the week, and he takes her privately aside and says, honey, I don't know what's happening. I don't know why. And I'd love to hear if there's anything I can do to help you, but you've been very short with the children and with me, and you need to stop. This is not okay. You're setting the thermometer of the home way frigid or like way hot, and we've got to have a course correction here, and you need to apologize to the kids. You've been snapping at them all week. Does that feel very nice to hear?
Well, and the thing is, the reason it feels like somewhat childish is because you're acting like a child, and he's having to correct you because you're being immature.
Yes. So it's the same conversation that you would have with a 7-year-old who's being grouchy and like being rude to people. That's the thing, is that sin is we're acting immaturely. Paul makes this point in 1 Corinthians. Like the Corinthians think they're very spiritual. This is one of their problems. They think themselves very spiritual. But Paul says, you're actually not spiritual at all. You are babies.
Yes.
You are infants. You need milk. Paul, you hear how offensive that is?
Yeah.
Paul's like, you guys are acting like babies. Stop it. You need to be men. Okay, did that feel patronizing to them? I bet the flesh, they were like, oh, who is this Paul guy? Paul can tell, stuff it. But they needed to hear it. So it is hard. Now, there are situations where a husband might be leading his wife or correcting his wife where he like makes a mistake.
Patriarchal.
Totally.
Yeah.
Or where he's
Those
being harsh. That's a sin. Or where he's, maybe she's not sure that she agrees with his assessment either. I think this is where a lot of it comes in. He's saying that we need to do this thing, but I actually think he's wrong. But even there, we need to look to the biblical examples. If he's not telling you to sin, he's not clearly sinning in his instruction.
Yeah.
Even if you don't like it, the point of submission is that you obey even when you don't think that he is correct.
Yeah. Like, for what other time does that exist for, if not for that?
Exactly. It's like, why would Paul have to tell, or whoever the author of Hebrews is, have to tell the church in Hebrews 13, 7 and 17 to obey your elders and submit to them. Let them do their task with joy, not with groaning. It's because there are going to be times when when a spiritual authority in your life, like a pastor, says, you need to stop doing this thing you're doing. Cut it out. And you're not going to necessarily agree with them, but they are the authority, and you need to submit to them. And they're going to give an account to God for how they exercise that authority if they're wrong. You will give an account, though, for whether you submitted to the lawful order.
Yeah.
If they say, if you submit and it turns out they were wrong, and let's say that they said, in this situation in your family, a counseling scenario, husband, you're sinning here. You really need to go apologize to your wife. And you're like, I don't know if I did. I think he might be wrong. And you just say, you know what? I'm going to submit to the authority God's put in my life. I'm going to go apologize. Let's say that the Lord in glory tells you, like, hey, he was wrong about that call. I think the Lord would still tell you, good job for listening.
Yep. And I just think there's supernatural divine protection when a wife submits, even knowing or thinking it might be foolish to do so.
Yeah. So it is hard to move from being uncorrected, like ever, which is, let's be honest, the natural state of most wives. Nobody in their life is correcting them on sin. Nobody.
Yeah, and Lord willing, the more you guys both grow in your roles and understanding, that will be like totally not something that has to happen a lot.
Yes. Now, if you think your husband is being harsh or you think he's sinning, then you should go to him and bring that concern to him. If it's a very serious concern, then you should ask another authority like a pastor to say,
not
can you help
necessarily
me?
Girlfriend.
Not a girlfriend. Don't share it as a prayer request to 15 girlfriends. Go to the approved authority that you can say, and then they might say, you know what, that is legitimate. He is being harsh. Let's meet. Let's have a meeting. And hopefully, if he's a good pastor, he's going to say, like, okay, we're going to talk about it now. You're not going to get to talk to me as a way of not talking to him.
Yeah.
Or tattling. We're going to now talk about it.
Yes.
Because you two need to solve this problem, not me and you.
Yes.
Not the pastor and the wife of some guy in the couple needs to solve it. So good pastors will always drive people to talk with the people you have a problem with, even if that's in your marriage.
Yeah.
Not just try to solve it in the therapeutic sort of way.
It can be hard to know what's real.
Yeah. Well, guys, we are out of time. It's our kids' bedtime. So we hopefully when you're listening to this, we have a baby and you know what's going on and we've updated you. But whether it's exactly on the normal schedule or next time we see you, we hope that this episode has been helpful. I do want to shout out and say our conference is coming up here in June, 12th to the 14th. And we've got just a lot of opportunities to hang out, make friends, meet other like-minded Christians. Pastor's breakfast for those who are pastors coming, a business mixer. We have a singles mixer. I'm putting on a concert, a lot of great speakers. We're going to have feats of strength with our first ever New Christendom Press games after the conference on Saturday. We'll have an all hands on deck barbecue on Sunday after church. So we hope you can stick around for church and then hang out with us there. But yeah, come join us here in Ogden, Utah. You can get more information and tickets at newchristendompress.com/2025. And, tell them that I sent you. There's not even going to be a place for you to tell them that I sent you, but we do hope to see you there. Until next time, Festin Alente, make haste slowly, and we'll catch you next time on Bright Hearth.